Well, all eyes on Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He's in Saudi Arabia today. In fact, video to our monitors shows Mr. Rubio sitting down with the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Now, the top topic there, President Trump's proposal to, quote, take over Gaza and own Gaza by U.S. authority. Those are the president's words. The big question is, how can that happen? We're talking about 2 million Palestinians displaced. Well, from talks about Gaza to talks about Russia's war in Ukraine, and here's also your headline this week. Top Russian officials, top U.S. officials sitting down together, but Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he didn't know anything about the meeting. So a lot of questions here. Let's go live to CBS News Middle East reporter Courtney Kealy. Courtney, this really follows a pattern. Of course, we know that Mr. Trump called Mr. Putin first, then he put in the call to Mr. Zelenskyy. Russia first, then Zelenskyy to the table. Do you think that's how it's going to play out here as well as far as meetings face to face?
Yeah, it's really similar to what he did with the Middle East, which was Israel first and then Arab leaders. So he's Putin first. President Trump had that phone call that we heard about last week. And now we know that Sergey Lavrov is on his way into Riyadh for talks tomorrow with the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's making his international debut with a very, very busy schedule, talking both about the Ukraine and Russian issue and what Russia is willing to do in these meetings, and then also talking to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman about the Gaza issue. So first, let's go to Ukraine and the Russians. And yes, just like you said it, Zelenskyy was left out of the talks. President Trump says they will talk and they will meet and he will be part of it, just not yet.
Wow, fascinating. And what's the response from European nations? Because so many European nations really do see Ukraine as sort of a stopgap to any Russian incursion into territory.
Right, so they scrambled for a meeting in Paris today. Many were in Munich over the weekend at that security conference. And then Emmanuel Macron called a meeting in Paris. And we're hearing some really interesting news, taking that security very seriously, not just adjacent countries like Poland, who said they will work on stability and strength, but not add troops. You've got the UK Prime Minister talking about boots on the ground for peacekeeping. Germany's also voiced that. So have the Swedes. So this is what Europe is looking at. If the U.S. is having this unilateral meeting with Russia that does not include Europe and their security, so they're scrambling to have their own meetings to discuss what they can do financially in terms of aid, in terms of weaponry, in terms of arms, and in terms of boots on the ground.
Yeah, there are reports that a lot of European nations feel like the new policy of the Trump administration just reverses course in the history of relations between the United States and many European nations. Talk to us about timing here. There are some reports that the Trump administration would like to see a deal get done by Easter. Is that even realistic given all of the geopolitical moves and all of the moves relative to military?
Well, this is a really big, sticky problem. And, just to get a deal on the table while President Trump wants to see a deal and he wants to be a part of that deal, and he's showing right now that he's starting it. Starting conversation is one thing. Actually having President Putin and President Zelenskyy in a room with President Trump is a whole other story. And that takes a lot. That takes a lot of mediation and negotiation. Now, President Trump has made it clear that he's very happy with his team. He's very happy with Steve Witkoff and what he's done for the ceasefire. We'll have to see if they can even start this with the Russians and the Ukrainians. But it's been a terrible three-year-long bloody war. There's got to be some resolution. But the Ukrainians do not want to give over minerals to the U.S. They don't want to give up their land, and they want Russia off of their land. So we'll have to see. Russia also has a really strategic port there. There's some strategies of places that they'll want to keep, like Sevastopol, because they've lost their port in Syria. So it's a part of a bigger picture, too, in terms of Russia interests and what's changed for them, because a lot has changed for them in the Middle East with Assad out of Syria. So it's not just looking at one part, it's looking at the equation. Like we went to Paris, we went to Munich. Now we're talking about Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and the Middle East. So a lot to talk about. A lot has changed so much right before President Trump came into office. And we'll have to see if he's able to leverage some of this.
Wow. Courtney Kealy, thank you so much. So many pieces on the board, so to speak, and we know you are keeping track of every one of them. So let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. He is at West Palm Beach. So what is the president saying about how these talks should go?
Hey there, Reed. Good to be with you. Well, President Trump wants to get a deal done, and that's in fact why we saw the president not only talk to President Vladimir Putin of Russia, but also President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. And the large focus for the president seems to be on ending the conflict, ending the bloodshed between these two nations. Now, we of course know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is on the ground in Saudi Arabia to meet with key Russian officials, as was just mentioned before you came to me here. But part of those meetings are essentially what the White House is calling a two-track system, that you have on one side of things the United States speaking with the Russians, mediated by the Saudis, and on the other side you have officials like Keith Kellogg, a special envoy to Ukraine, talking to the Ukrainians and the Europeans. But it's important to point out that the Ukrainians weren't invited to this meeting happening with Russia, and Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, has said that no deal will be agreed to, essentially, without Ukraine being a member of those conversations. But still, nonetheless, the president saying just yesterday to reporters here in West Palm Beach that Ukraine, and Zelenskyy himself, of course, would be involved in those discussions. So the White House looking to strike some type of deal, but it's anyone's guess as to what that deal will be. But behind the scenes, they are working to talk and start those conversations starting tomorrow in Saudi Arabia, Reed.
Well, Willie, this president is, by his own branding, the deal-making president. We, of course, know when we look at this through the lens of making a deal, we know what Ukraine wants. It appears we know what Russia wants. What is in it from the Trump administration to strike a deal? What does the United States want, and what does the leader who the United States elected as president want?
Yeah, well, part of the president has spoken about this recently, is that the Americans, meaning the American people, taxpayers, have invested tens of billions of dollars into this war effort to help defend Ukraine. And part of the thinking behind the scenes is perhaps there will be some type of energy deal struck, that mineral rights could perhaps be something that the Ukrainians could offer in payment, so to speak, in terms of giving Americans something back. But one thing I do want to also point out on top of this is the Trump administration has really been adamant about pushing the Europeans to be more involved in this peace process. In fact, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, recently announced that he would be willing to send British troops to be involved in some type of peacekeeping operation after some type of deal has been struck. So the Europeans are already stepping up in terms of stepping up and putting those boots on the ground. The United States has been really clear about saying that no American troops will be involved in that type of role. So it's on two fronts. It's one thing getting something from the Ukrainians, perhaps that's energy down the road, but on the other side of it, it's also getting the Europeans to be more involved in that region and defending and helping to defend the Ukrainians and give them the assistance that they need.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman, great to see you on a Monday. Have a great day, my friend.